Welcome. You have shown such extraordinary discernment to choose this session to attend. I mean, really, it was a test. You are the creme of the crop of Women Deliver. We're taking down your names and awards will be given. Because you've shown yourselves as exercising the most strategic insight, the most principled action, and of course the best intellectual judgment of what is the key issue of this conference, and it is that which we are about to address. We're going to make a significant challenge to a paradigm that's far too settled, and it is the idea that somehow we should associate women always with vulnerability. The idea that somehow we talk about women primarily as victims and less as survivors, that somehow we have found ourselves describing women from the standpoint of injury and wound rather than from the reality of strength, contribution, and agency. And in that distorted framing of the reality of women's day-to-day lives, arguably, we've lost one of the most important energies in a world where energy scarcity is seizing the minds of many policymakers. It is the energy of a robust, determined compassion and ability to set aside one's own self-interest in the name of the children over whom she cares, the older people for whom she provides protection, and the community to which she is committed. Yes, men do that, yes. And they do it in sometimes the same ways, often in very different ways. That we celebrate. You only have to say the word hero, and you know that you immediately are in a masculine space. Well, we have to broaden the categories in order to capture, acknowledge and understand the power and energy that women have for healing, for solutions, for taking on the world's gravest challenges, for being first and foremost responders. And it's in that spirit that we've convened this fantastic panel. Now, it's meant to be a fishbowl. I just said to Her Royal Highness, maybe we should quote Dory, which I think we've often quoted Dory, actually, only I can't remember what it was. That's a subtle joke for anyone who likes Disney films as I do. So thank you once again for being together. Your Royal Highness, Princess Sarah Zaid, you've been challenging us to break open settled ideas and really to challenge the customary way of thinking. If I just ask you, why do you think women as first responders matters, and why might this be a topic that we should understand better and hold to the forefront of our thinking? What does it mean for you? What are some of the challenges that you see for women in this regard?
Thank you, Dr. Gilmore. There's a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
I think it makes sense.
Absolutely. Women are, and mothers are the most extraordinary powerhouse and will stop at nothing to protect their children, their health, their rights, their safety, their security. And we have to absolutely put them at the center and empower them so that they can do this to the fullest and best of their abilities. I don't think that anyone here needs to be convinced that women are extraordinary. Women need to be empowered, that women are the best things ever. So I'm going to focus on the challenges. I have three of them that I want to raise. One is access to information. That girls and women need access to sexual and reproductive health education so that they can make informed choices for their bodies and the needs, and for their children so that they can survive and thrive and contribute and participate and all of the other things that we want women to be able to do, and that women can make such a huge impact doing. With education comes everything from early and exclusive breastfeeding, comes birth spacing, sexual relationships themselves. It also leads to the end of harmful practices in humanitarian settings, we see a dramatic increase, particularly at the moment in Syria, of very, very early marriages. And only through information and education of women, but also of men. But you know, women drive so many of these practices themselves within their households, so that they understand that you are not necessarily ensuring your daughter's security and health and safety by marrying them off at the age of 13 or 14, that there are other choices and that this is harmful, and it will quite possibly lead to death if they don't have the services that they need, and sometimes even if they do have those services. FGM, inequality in the home, all of these things we can help to deal with if women have access to information. What we have been doing, the way that the systems have been created and the way that we have continued to work, lack of inclusion in decision-making. We ourselves need to do so much more to make sure that a woman's needs and her voice are in the middle of everything that we do. You know, the systems that have been created and that we continue to move forwards have, and I've used this before, so I apologize if you're hearing it again. You go into the butcher's shop, you see the image of a cow, and with the dotted line identifying the leg and the neck and all of the bodily bits. This is what we've done to the woman. And we've taken her stomach and we've given that to WFP. Her children have gone to UNICEF. Her ovaries and uterus have gone to UNFPA. Vaccines over here, you know, empowerment to UN Women. We have to bring her back together again. And we have to stop saying that she is in a humanitarian setting or a development setting. And we have to stop competing as well, so that to keep propagating these differences. All of our mechanisms, whether it be around data collection, financing, accountability, have also helped to continue to create these decisions. Do I have time for one more? Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
Okay. Just this one.
A girl and woman's body and rights are so highly politicized, but when we put her needs and her rights and voice at the center, we're going to be pushing back really hard against member states and donors, particularly those that are conservative or becoming increasingly conservative or speak more to domestic politics than they do to global needs. And there are some issues that are going to have them screaming: contraception, access to legal and safe abortions, sexual and reproductive health education, domestic violence, rape within marriage. But if we're not saying this stuff, who is going to be doing it? It is our responsibility to be the voice for the women and the children that need us the most. And so we have to be really loud and really brave for them, because that's what they need, so that they can best look after themselves and everybody that depends on them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Royal Highness. Superb. Thank you. Thank you. Thank goodness there is a doctor in the house. Her name is Dr. Flavia Pastreo, an inspiration, a leader in this area, and the Assistant Director General of WHO, and a dear friend. Flavia, when you think about these concepts of autonomy, of agency, you know, they feel very abstract, and they're precious legal ideas, but they're very abstract. How does this work practically from your standpoint? Can the participation of women make a difference to health outcomes and a difference to quality of care?
Thank you very much. And I'm not sure what this fishbowl is supposed to be about, but I understand the audience can interrupt us anytime they like and ask us questions.
Now, that's a hell of a good point. It's a fishbowl with sharks. That's very true, Dr. Pastreo, and that's why you're a doctor and I've barely got a Bachelor of Arts. Please, if they're not talking sensibly, I mean, clearly not me, but if any of these, do interrupt us and do challenge what we're saying. Thank you very much. Please,
So,
ma'am.
having said that, let me start. What we know from all the literature and the science about women participation in the design of health services is quite simple. When women are engaged in designing the services, in designing the system throughout which those services are provided, the results of those services are far higher. We have tons of evidence, including, just to give one example, because I know we have, I don't want to have any shark here coming, no. But we have examples for research in Nepal, where women groups got together to discuss how to best address reduction of particular neonatal mortality. And what we saw, that by getting together and discussing this, there was impact not only on the reduction of neonatal mortality, but also on the reduction of maternal mortality. So I'm just giving you these examples to realize how important the active participation, but not in principle, in theory, but really, and not just by one individual, but by community of women, by group of women together, to share their knowledge, their experience, and their ability, their innovation, their ability to deal with issues. So we know that very clearly, but somehow, when it comes to situation of humanitarian settings and countries in fragile context, we forget that and we go for the mode of women as passive recipients, yes, of exactly. The distribution of the whatever package of health services is designed, without understanding, in fact, that if we don't engage women, them being in refugee camps, internally displaced camps, women on the move, women that are forcibly displaced or that are migrating, if we don't engage them, we don't engage and understand what they need, and also their potential to find the responses to the situation, we are not going to have the outcomes we have. And here, I think, is where we have, where the gender aspects, the gender lens is crucial. I really think, coming back to your point, Dr. Gilmore, at the beginning of this conversation, and also what Royal Highness has explained, some of these systems were designed primarily by men that had in mind the system of the refugee crisis, the passive recipients. And I think this movement that is happening of women participating to the design of peace processes, of humanitarian conferences, and increasing the number of women in those, I think they will be transformative to also inject that mindset in the participation and in the provision of health services.
Dr. Pastreo, calling it as it is. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Rand.
Yes.
Oh
Rand,
gosh, I didn't get any shark. Yeah, that was the best.
Fish are friends too. Rand, you know this in a very close-up front way. You've lived in a very direct way with the consequences of insecurity, of conflict, and discrimination, actually. I mean, how do you see this, particularly from the standpoint of somebody who is younger and thinking about the intersections between leadership, young people, and the challenges of finding solutions to peace and, absence of peace and to insecurity?
Well, I think first off, we need to kind of specify what the term youth means, because most of the time we use it as a comprehensive term. Who are we talking about here? What kind of educational background are they coming from? What economic background? What social status? Most of the time we see young people in these conferences who are mostly privileged because they know English, they know a background about this information, and they have access to internet, because where do you see these applications? What about the marginalized youth? Secondly, I would like to tell you about some of the initiatives that we're doing as YPR Network under the UNFPA. There are some amazing initiatives in refugee camps where they train young people on sexual reproductive health and rights in humanitarian settings. Now, these initiatives are wonderful, but they are scattered. There is no unified strategy towards this. Like, where are we going with this?
most importantly then is in these conferences as well, in these meetings, most of the time we're addressing the problem, we're not addressing the solutions. So what are the solutions? How are we going to change these words into action? What are we supposed to do after we finish with this conference or with this meeting or with the consultancies that we invite young people to? So another thing is that most of the time young people feel excluded. They don't feel like they have an identity. They don't feel like they are part of the community. And that kind of explains why most young people join extremist or radical institutions, because in a way these institutions make them feel like they are inclusive, that they have an identity or they have a motivation or a goal to work towards. So what my point is that we really do need to make young people feel like they are included. And we need to stop using the term meaningful youth engagement as a popular term, because we need to understand what that really means in action and on the ground. So it's very important that we use the energy of young people, their knowledge. We know what we want, we know what we need. So we need to send them to, for example, refugee camps or the areas of crisis to collect data, to collect information, to train young people, but with a unified strategy. So yes, include us.
Fantastic, Rand, and just superb. Radicalization for hope, for tolerance, for peace.
Yes.
And hashtag hand it over.
Hand it over, yes.
Hashtag hand it over. Sandy, I think the Women's Refugee Commission would agree with what Rand has said, because it is clear from your research that we don't seem to have developed a strategic engagement with the power and energy, particularly of young people, but of women broadly. What are some of the solutions, or what evidence are you finding that there are both challenges and interventions that, as Rand said, let's get solution-oriented?
Sure. So I can go through a few of the initiatives that the Women's Refugee Commission with partners have started. One of them is to pilot the safety and feasibility of community-based care for survivors of sexual violence in crisis. This because when women often need it most, women and girls often need it most, health facilities have been destroyed, health workers themselves have been, if they survive the crisis, have fled perhaps with their families from conflict and fighting, and insecurity in general precludes women's access to health facilities. So we're piloting the safety and feasibility of community-based care for survivors of sexual violence. Another initiative that we are undertaking with women and women's groups is to look at community resilience, and in particular around gender and sexual and reproductive health risk and emergencies, and doing that in an inclusive way so that we do include adolescents and adolescent subpopulations, so very young adolescents, married adolescents, women with disabilities, women living with HIV and AIDS. And we work with these communities to both assess their own gender and sexual and reproductive health risk, as well as the capacities in the communities, and to identify particular action plans that local government units and civil society organizations can do to support those action plans, and trying to get buy-in and support all the way up to the national level in disaster risk management agencies. So those are some of the initiatives. We're also looking at the particular needs of very young adolescents who often miss out on opportunities for education and have menarche before they even realize how their body works or functions. So giving them opportunities to get education to avoid the pitfalls of early forced marriage if possible. Those are some of the examples.
Thank you very much. And listening to you and knowing your groundbreaking work, I almost feel like we need to take sexual and reproductive health away from the neck down approaches to above the neck engagement as well, to borrow the princess's idea that we've dismembered and need to remember the woman at the centre of the project. Sue England, I know that there's been extraordinary developments through the work of civil society actors in breaching this gap, building a bridge in the gap of community engagement and empowerment. From your standpoint, what do you think is are we discovering or learning about ways in which to empower people even in the toughest of places at the most difficult of times?
Yeah, thanks. It comes with some of the divide between development experience and emergencies, and what you learn in development, which then you adapt to the context of an emergency situation. And so I suppose we really know that if you can engage with CSOs, faith-based organisations, international NGOs that do have trusted relationships already, then they already have the relationship in the communities to help change things and to engage people. So I think then the women get involved anyway, because most of those organisations have had methods and ways of bringing in women. So I suppose an example I would like to raise, there's a few that we might cover over the hour, but the first one I'd like to raise is really the Ebola response and how women got engaged in that through our organisation and other faith-based organisations within Sierra Leone. And one of the things about that in terms of what we were doing beforehand and why I'm saying this is that we'd already been there for 20 years. We'd already done quite a lot of faith alliance work between the Muslim faith leaders and the Christian faith leaders. Their wives, so pastors' wives, Muslim imams' wives, and the approaches to help break down the stereotypical barriers, to break down stigma and to really change attitudes, which helped introduce more caring practices for HIV and for maternal newborn care. So when we got to the Ebola experience, it was really easy then to get into the faith organisations to change practices such as what was happening around burial of bodies, stopping people wanting to touch the bodies and stuff like that. So I suppose the story from our experience of that, and if I can quote, we ended up joining forces with 3 community faith-based organisations. We trained 18,000 community focus group leaders with our faith-based leaders as the people who led those. And we managed 24,000 safe burials after that. Of those trained workers who then became the safe burial people, 86 were women. And the reason they were women was varied, but they put their hands up to do this amazing work. And I'd like to quote one. Her name is Masaroy Kamara. And I have left a few of these outside. Masaroy survived Ebola. 3 members of her family did not. She was in an Ebola centre. She watched literally hundreds of bodies get stacked up in the corner in the same room that she was, and watched them undignified death in the corner and bodies dragged away. And when she survived it and came out the other end, she said, you know what, I know all about Ebola. I've got some immunity now and I can do something about dignified burial. And so there's an amazing picture of her trained others and carrying this dead child who's been she's been wrapped up and cared for appropriately with the right equipment and they're safe. But instead of just, dragging along bodies and putting them in the burial, she's carrying this child and she's dignified saying goodbye to this child. So she was like a woman champion, and there were 86 women champion amongst those burial teams. So I thought I'd raise that as one of the issues around women.
Sue England from the wonderful World Vision. Thank you so much for giving the grace of that story to us. I think what's particularly affecting by it is the idea of dignity in the full life course. Did you hear that? And there were 2 big messages there, that dignity in dying and in responding to death is as precious to our innate sense of esteem and purpose and strength as many other things that come more naturally to mind. And thank you so much for sharing that. The other thing I was struck by from what you're saying is that preparation for crisis and managing such as contagion begins many years before. I mean, it is just not true that communities move from being in a development cycle and then consciously go, oh, we're now in a humanitarian crisis. That is us. That's our fiction. We have fictionalized, on the basis of certain modus operandi, ideas that have segmented out our responsibility. And we've managed along the way to lose disaster risk reduction, emergency preparedness, gender-sensitive multi-hazard risk assessment, for example. And it just strikes me that the Sustainable Development Agenda really needs to come alive universally, everywhere, as the Princess said, and no one should be left behind. You know, you shouldn't be denied access to essential services just because of where you live, or just because of who you are, or just because you need a service inconvenient to my particular sensibility. Anita, you've been working on thinking about how to communicate this agenda for leaving no one behind. And in particular, that means leaving no woman, no adolescent, and no child behind. What do you see as the possibilities lying ahead of us for making disruptive change here, transformative change?
That's great, Kate. And I think it's because I was moving around so much, he didn't want to turn it on before. Am I good? Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kate, and thanks to everybody on the panel and then the audience. How many of you were here yesterday for the essential care and humanitarian crisis? It's great. So we started a fantastic conversation yesterday, and we didn't have time. I thought we could have gone for another hour. There were a number of you that asked questions. So because this is a fishbowl, and the intention was actually to have us kind of be in the center of all of you, to have this kind of interactive conversation. So we might end up crowd surfing or something like that. But definitely welcome your engagement in this conversation, because there are a couple of themes or memes, I think, that are coming out of the Women Deliver conference. And for those of you that were in the last session, the last plenary, which was looking at the role of men in Women Deliver and empowering girls and women, a few of the speakers were talking about changing the norms. And really, this is the patriarchal construction, not because of gender, but because of the patriarchal society. And that really struck with me. And Kate, what you were just saying in terms of the achieving the SDGs, we'll have to put the last first. And in many cases, the last is indeed women and girls. And if we think about that, you know, in crisis situations, women are often, and girls are hit first and hit worst. They're helped last. I was at a session yesterday talking about nutrition, and it's often the girls and women who eat last and eat the least. And if they're in a situation that is one of humanitarian assistance, they might not even be in the line for food services. So when you think about that kind of construct, the way that we have been trying to kind of change that paradigm through the work that we're doing with the Secretary General's Every Woman, Every Child effort, which is now more inclusive because we're calling it everywhere. There's a global strategy for women, children's, and adolescents' health everywhere. As you were saying, Kate, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, you shouldn't be denied the services that you so deserve. So how are we going to do that, and how are we going to have the paradigm shift? So much has already been said on the panel. I won't even try to repeat it, but I will say, if we can't stop the violence in Syria, all of us in this room, or in Chad, CAR, you name it, what we can at least do is change ourselves. And you know, Sandy and others have been talking about the very specific programs that they're working on to empower and include women in the decision-making process. So I think, of course, that is one, having a gender-sensitive lens. But then, of course, there is the actual composition in our organizations, whether it is NGOs, the UN, private sector, civil society. I know there have been some sessions on that at Women Deliver, but I think we probably fully haven't addressed women in leadership positions, and in particular, the very challenges of having women in leadership positions in humanitarian settings, and including the UN. I just came through pulled up some stats. 92% of the senior-most positions at the UN right now are male. And 4 years ago, UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon, he told a gathering, my UN top humanitarian official, my High Commissioner for Human Rights, the head of management, my top lawyer, and even our top cop are all women. Today, they're all men. And there are five out of 16%, 5 out of 16 peacekeeping missions are men. Out of the ASG level. Now, present company accepted, and it's fantastic that we have such leadership with Kate and Flavia, because it's 77%
Failed
male.
recruitment processes.
And out of 23 EU nationals that were, now a lot of this is because, as we know, the UN top positions are not, the Secretary General is under very direct pressure from a number of governments. So out of 23 EU nationals, all but 5 were men. And a lot of this is because, it's not entirely a merit-based system. Now, why do I say that? I say it because, and I think we need more data on exactly what that means to have women in those types of positions of power. But I think if we did have that kind of paradigm shift, we wouldn't have these debates, these debates over whether gender-sensitive programming is a good thing. And then especially if you have women in those decision-making positions in the humanitarian situations, for example, a woman intuitively is going to understand that a walk, 15, 20 minutes in the dark to go to a latrine isn't necessarily a good thing. Not having water facilities, in schools for menstrual hygiene management. All of these things. I think we need to think about that a little bit more deeply, but we also need to think about how we can change ourselves as we're having these the empowerment of women.
Thank you. Fantastic, Anita. Flavia, I'm going to give you the floor, and then I'm going to come into the audience. I have an inkling to be Oprah. Just a second.
I just, Kate, I just wanted to say, you started this conversation with this idea of the hero.
Yeah.
And how you explain it immediately associate to a male. But can we not, together with the Women Deliver group, create the image of the heroine and have, like when you spoke about the women that helped, in the Ebola response, those were the heroine. I tell you, we in WHO, everybody knows we had a very difficult time in the response for Ebola. Our best per people, that man, that is, I'm using these verbs appropriately, that man, the response, we prize her. Her name is Margaret Kumunu. We gave her the Woman of the Year award. So here is another heroine of a response, an emergency response, but you don't know. I'm sure that here nobody knows. So what I'm trying to suggest is, can we create a narrative and highlight the examples of where women have been example of first responders and they have done great things, and celebrate that.
Thank you so much, Flavia. This is superb. Okay, fishbowl. It's time for the sharks. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. So today and through this conference, I've heard so many wonderful examples of women at the grassroots level acting as first responders. But a question that sticks with me is whether it is not a perpetuation of the victimization of women, of girls in color, and women and girls from the global south, that these women still don't have access to the highest levels of decision-making and initiatives and organizations designed to respond to their needs. And how can we address that?
Thank you so very much. Okay. That's a challenge to ourselves, which I like a lot. Please.
Hi, I'm Karen from Bolivia. I just wanted to ask, I have this question in my mind every time I think about enabling women to put themselves as first responders. And it is, how do we do this? How do we enable this without, and sort of a little bit related, how do we do this without perpetuating an idea of a certain type of woman? An idea of how a woman should be. How do we sort of do both?
This is a beautiful question, because we can't be taken back to some essentialist account that somehow once you're born without that dangly bit, you're visited upon by true greatness. Okay, this is a very important point. I've got some. Can you meet me halfway? Thank you. Please come into the light. Come into the light.
Thank you. No, I was just struck by a question about whether we can conflate responses to calamities, to epidemics, and to conflict. Can we see them as similar responses? And what is the political economy of each? And I'm struck by this question because in India, we are right now faced with a country which is at war with its own people. And in central India, because of the imperatives of servicing extractive industries, the indigenous populations of central India are really under attack. And there's a situation of conflict, an extreme militarization, which is perhaps unsurpassed in the world. And how do we see responses to a situation like that, when the state actors are totally complicit? I mean, the UN or any humanitarian group cannot come in. MSF was hounded out of that region in India. Amnesty has also been asked not to interfere. So, I mean, we are working with the women who are responding, despite police torture, despite repression, despite repeated attacks. And health systems have collapsed because no one wants to go and work in such a situation. So I'd just like to know, what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Panel, we have some powerful questions, I mean, about our own identity in our own organisations. And then what I would say is a question about demography of power and influence. How do we avoid essentialism and some mystical treatment of the category woman, which doesn't bear any relationship to the real world? And what do we do about this, the savagery, meaning savageness of the way in which at times the state will allow the body of the woman to be approached and engaged? And I mean as in cruelty, the extreme cruelty, and including to the point where we're not even allowed to access her at all. Can you fix it? Just, fix that for us. Yeah.
Maybe
Come on.
if,
Sue, please. Yeah, gorgeous.
They're very difficult questions, so thank you for them. I think it's a challenge for all of us, aren't they, to try and think about how, as each organisation, what we think. I think access to decision makers, the first question, particularly our lessons in that are, even if the women are illiterate women or very low level knowledge and education, engaging them as community health workers usually brings out this amazing empowerment because for the first time they're offered some education and training at low literacy levels. In Afghanistan, we used mobile phone technology with pictorials for them to teach the women that they were visiting in the home. And it made an incredible difference. They felt more powerful because they had this amazing piece of equipment, but they also were feeling stronger because they were bringing a message. But it wasn't just them with the household, it was them being invited to join the village health committees because they were bringing messages. Yeah. So the empowerment happens through those sort of community participatory actions. The community health committees had power to say things because they are led by men in Afghanistan, as an example, the Shura leaders. Yeah. But the women had a voice. So I wanted to answer that one as
Thank you so much, Sue. It's about getting very local too, isn't it? It's not about us global.
It's not about us.
It's not about us. Your Royal Highness, please.
Answer to two different questions. Woman of the Year, Person of the Year. If it's about a full meritocracy, if it's about full equality, then it's about being, the person of the year, regardless of dangly bits. Thank you, Dr. Gilmore.
Thank you very much
for that. And then, in response to the last question, please, we, as a community, are lacking collective outrage, and we are lacking a sense of urgency. We have been too quiet about the deliberate targeting of medical facilities and healthcare workers. We are too quiet about the targeting of human rights activists, of individuals that are willing to put themselves on the line every day, whether they're part of our organizations or part of communities who are trying to make such a profound difference. And we should be shouting every day about what is happening. If you look at the examples again in Syria, hospitals being double tapped. Do you know what that means? It means that a hospital is bombed, and then the double tap comes and is timed deliberately around when people have rushed into that hospital to help the wounded. It is a deliberate attack. And the other thing is that it's fully understandable. Not everybody can or will operate in some of the harshest settings. It doesn't make any sense, but I think that there's an honesty required about what organizations can and will do, and that if you can't be there, if you won't be there, then how are you going to support in another way? What are we going to do to enable and support and empower individuals on the ground, organizations that are in some of the hardest places?
Thank you so much. Yep. And
Maybe
then
just to add from the health sector point of view, I think one thing that we can do is equip our health workers, because very often the health workers are the ones that are the first respondents, whether they are male or females. But for example, we have wonderful midwives, even young midwives that are very capable of providing services, and they find themselves in very many different parts of the world. But equipping that health personnel with the knowledge, the skills, and the understanding of how to deal also with some difficult issues. For example, they're very equipped to deal with the delivery, but very often they're not so equipped to deal with like the aftermath of sexual violence, how to work with a young woman or a woman that has been exposed to sexual violence. So we are working from the health point of view to equip those health workers with those skills, that knowledge and that sensitivity to treat young women and other people affected by conflict, displacement with the dignity that they deserve.
fantastic. Thank you so much, Flavia. Sandy, you.
Sure. I was just going to say, I'm not sure how much we're actually enabling women as first responders. They already are first responders. They are there in their communities and responding. So we're trying to support actually their efforts and to get assistance internally to address their concerns. And I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Cynthia Mung. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Thai-Burma border situation, but for decades, the civil society organizations, women's organizations there have served the needs of hundreds of thousands of forced migrants into Thailand by setting up safe homes, safe shelters for girls, getting children into Thai schools, dealing with people who are living with HIV, doing all kinds of services the international community was not attending to it at all for years. So, I mean, and those, I think, efforts deserve a really close look to see how, we can better support those initiatives.
Thank you, Sandy. I think you've opened up a really critical point about the importance of civil society, actually, but also it's a contracting space and a space under a lot of pressure and feeling a bit anxious. How are you? You good?
I'm fine. Thank you. Christina de Vries of Coordate. I can relate very much to what you are saying, and I think we should invest more in women's organizations, local women's organizations, and women as first responders, because many of them are expected to work as volunteers. So some time ago, the World Food Programme was confronted with women who had to give out porridge to children, and they went on strike because they had to do it for nothing, while the WFP men actually had huge salaries. But the women were actually portrayed in the media as actually denying food to their children, while they were just asking for, we are being used for all kinds of programs, whether it's disaster risk reduction, food, health work, whatever. So I think first, I like the term first responders, but I think that has to have more status. It has to, we have to invest more in these women.
Do you want to get up on that panel? That was fantastic. Thank you so very much. Excuse me. Excuse me. How are you? You okay? Excuse me.
Don't sit on anyone's lap.
Thanks, Oprah. I'm Maggie from Tear Fund, and thank you to all the panelists. I was just picking up on the community-based and the local actors, and I was really interested with the idea about that pilot. I think it was Sandra mentioned about training local people about first responders to women who've experienced sexual violence within an emergency setting. And I just wondered, I don't know if there's time, but if you could just give a little bit more detail about that. What does it actually look like? How do you do that? Train people in these difficult contexts, if that's okay.
Sure. A little bit, should I go ahead or wait? Should I go ahead? Okay. I mean, the vision around this project was eventually that care could be given from woman to woman. It's not difficult, and the idea from it came during the situation in Darfur when sexual violence against women did not go away. It just simply stayed, and humanitarian agencies had to do something about it. And it was at that time when I was there that I thought, this is all wrong. I mean, women should be able to give this care to women. So essentially what we did is design a research project, and we've piloted inside Burma with community-based organizations. The curriculum has been given now to UNICEF, who are piloting it in South Sudan and in Somalia with fairly good success in terms of women actually accessing the services from community health workers who have been trained. And there are 3 tiers of community health workers, so some that have less experience, education, and background who may refer to another tier of community health workers who give emergency contraception, who can give PEP, who can give treatment to prevent STIs, and can support referrals for psychosocial care.
Thank you, Sandy. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Fatma. I am from Palestine Red Crescent Society, Palestine. Actually, we have a very huge experience in this title. And I believe that women in my country are from the most vulnerable people. But also, I think that they are the real ideal that we have to talk about. So I think, and I recommend, and I thought that I will see a woman here from the people who really suffered, who really tried to put and to develop her simple mechanism to cope some emergency. Because I think we don't need more reports and more strategies and more mechanism. We need just to hear about their experiences and to learn from them, because I'm sure that they have something more than what is written in all the reports. Women in my country succeeded to participate in economic labor. They are educated. They were responsible on their children and family. They are household. They succeeded to take the role of mother and father together while their husbands were killed by occupation. We have many martyrs, many men arrested, and they succeeded to build a very strong generation since 48 until now. So I believe that we are strong. Thank God that we didn't participate in making wars in the world, but as women, I believe that we can put our fingers or put our own stamp in making peace in this world. Thank you.
I'm going to come back to you, but I did promise Alison around here. Are you okay? Thanks, Alison. That's a great gift. Hand it over. Hashtag.
Thank you. So, returning to sexual violence, I would like to share a story. In Albania, I'm from Albania. And there is kind of a contradiction among women. For example, about 8 years ago, I reported to the police a man who assaulted me. He was actually my boyfriend, and then I left him, he wouldn't let me, he violated me, and so on, and so I had to report this to the police. But from the country I come from, the moral norms and everything. I was so, I felt discriminated. But not only from society. When I went to the police, the social worker, after I reported the case and everything, instead of supporting me, she told me, look, I have to tell you a story. A friend of mine was beaten regularly by her boyfriend, and now they are living happily and they are married. Wow. And I just stood there, and that's where I lose totally faith in the system. So what should we do to make women more how should I say it?
Solidarity.
Solidarity,
Belief,
exactly,
yeah. Oh,
exactly. Thank you.
That was incredible, thank you. That was brilliant. And sometimes the system is part of the problem. I mean, you're abused and subjected to that, and then the system does it almost again, but in a different way.
It's indifferent to us.
Yeah, it's indifferent. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Can you come into the light? What is wrong with me? Don't answer that. Don't answer that.
Overall, very well.
Yeah, am I doing okay?
Yes,
Right,
you are.
let's go.
Hi, my name is Hodan Ali. I'm a nurse practitioner who trained in Canada, but originally from Somalia. So I have a question regarding what is about to come, which is the closing of the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, and the impact that will have on an already devastated system in Somalia. The maternal mortality rate is one of the worst. The under 5 mortality rate for children under 5 is the worst. I'm just wondering if any of you can shed light in terms of what would be in store, if there's any plans to deal with what's coming up.
Thank you so much. I want us to just notice that there is sorrow and strength in the room. I mean, this is about some of the cruelest things that can ever happen to anybody who is simply going about life's daily business. Refugee camps, sexual violence denied the full sense of justice and the deprivation of access to dignity and recognition of the kind that actually we depend on all the time, the strength of women to get past sorrow, to get past otherwise preventable human suffering.
Can I pick up
help
one?
us out.
I think your story really touched me because it's what the situation you described is exactly what we're trying to correct. And we know when we publish the data about 1 woman out of 3 having experienced during the life course of violence, we know that the health workers, what you described is the health worker was unable or unwilling to provide the care that you needed. And it's the things that touch me, why touch me? Because the knowledge is out there.
The knowledge is there.
The guidelines are out there. The training for the health workers are out there. And they talk about the situation like you're being met with respect. You being able to speak in a separate part with someone that understands the situation, that is able to provide support to you, is also able to extend the support maybe of the social services, that is also looking for the legal enforcement that is sometimes needed. And instead, the system fails. So what I want to say, Kate, that is in the story that is like we need to have those tools, that knowledge in the hands of activists and women that can share them and then can also use the shame, because it's not that we don't know. The knowledge exists and the tools are there, but yet the situation is still occurring and we are not changing it. We are not transforming it. And we are not enabling the young woman to find the care she needs.
Thank you so much, Flavia. Rand, I don't know about you, but a part of it seems to me that we sometimes have the wrong people speaking, and we have I think that was the challenge. We have all the reports and all the strategies. How do we get into a different dialogue about this, and a dialogue that has consequences that address the situations that women are living with on a day-to-day basis, including on the scale of the closure of Dadaab? Rand, what are you hearing and thinking?
First, I would like to say hello. I'm also from Palestine. and I agree with everything that you're saying. Secondly, I would like to touch upon your story, and UN Women says that 1 in 3 women are abused by their intimate partner, and I think we really need to reduce these numbers. Back to Palestine, I think that one of the problems is that most of the time in all of the countries that are in conflict, we send international organizations to support these countries, and most of the time they do not know the local context of these countries, and they don't know the specificity of the traditions, of the norms, of the culture, and so on. So I think working with local organizations is very important because they have grew up there, they know how things work, they know what the system does and how to approach the system. But also it's very important that we also work with religious leaders, for example. Going back to sexual reproductive health and rights, for example, in Palestine, it's a very a conservative society, and talking about sexual reproductive health and rights is considered a taboo, which is just like any other country that is conservative. So our approach, which is unlike any other white peer network approach in the developing countries, is that we target religious leaders and we kind of change the name of sexual reproductive health and rights into healthy living to kind of cope with the local context of Palestine. So I think it's important that we study the traditions, the culture, and the way, the specificity of the community, but also try to tailor these interventions to suit this as well.
Thank you so much, Rand. Anita.
I just wanted to say a word on the DAB, and going back to the fact that these decisions are made at the highest political levels. This is a humanitarian situation, but it's a political decision, both by the government of Kenya to close to close the camp, but also the political indecision or inaction by so many donors and others to actually contribute. And I think it's coming to a fore now because next week is the World Humanitarian Summit. The Secretary General has released his Agenda for Humanity. I mean, what could sound better than that? And if you read the document, I mean, it is, again, it's a document, but inside that is basically what we, both internationals as individuals, could do better so that we wouldn't have to see a Dadaab. We've been talking about this before. Dadaab has been open for what, nearly 20 years? And so this is not a temporary solution. This, for many people, is their entire life. And so if we're talking a paradigm shift, how can we have these types of Dadaabs? Right? So I think as we're coming from Women Deliver, we can think very deliberately about how we are going to demand that women are not victims, that they are first responders. They are, as you were saying, the very people who are living, breathing. They are the conflict. And then how we, and the we who are the international community, the others who are coming to help, how we can work in concert. So there is within the World Humanitarian Summit, there are a number of kind of opportunities. There's a high-level leaders session on gender, for example. I think some of the messages we can take, we can bring there. With Every Woman, Every Child, the work that we've been doing for Everywhere, we have some messages we'd be happy to share with you. And I just want to say one other thing quickly to the point from Bolivia in terms of the construct of victimization and women and what does this mean. I may get in trouble, but I think I've been troubled a little bit by at Women Deliver how understanding why Women Deliver. This is the 4th conference. The first conference was very deliberate to raise awareness about maternal health. Just one more thing. However, the tagline "Women Deliver More Than Babies" has therefore brought kind of pitted mothers on one side, those who haven't reproduced or don't want to reproduce on the other side. And if thinking about how we can collectively bring that energy together as the one woman,
Fantastic.
I think if we leave that, we will be, I'd be happy to go into that much longer, but in thinking about the story for the women.
In keeping with the fishbowl, I think there's a very powerful point, and if anyone would like to gather around Anita at the end to talk about that further, we'd like to capture that because there is a renewable energy issue here that we seem to be missing, which is the power of that gift of compassion that only parents feel for children. I think you wanted the floor just once more,
yes.
so very briefly.
I just like to add a small thing. In my country, the problem is the big corruption. There is so much corruption there, and the only way out, as I see it, is the non-government organizations, because we can't rely on the government, not at all. We have reported cases to the commissionary, we have reported cases to the police, and nothing has been done. In any case, so the only way out, as I see it, is with these organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a challenge for us to stand together and to really value the space that is uniquely civil society, and that freedom of expression, freedom of information, freedom of assembly are the building blocks for the world that we need to see and the world that we need to create. Your Royal Highness, I'm going to give you the very last word.
Oh dear. For me, much of this comes back to our need for urgent collective outrage and willingness to be very brave to speak about issues. Corruption within governments, and governments neglecting populations, the Rohingya, the treatment of refugees across Europe, to stop countries, governments, from being allowed to pick and choose issues as it serves their immediate domestic politics. You know, the numbers of refugees coming into Europe at the moment, where are they from? Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. You know, it's not a surprise. Look at history. Look at 13 years of comprehensive sanctions on Iraq that helped to break the back of the middle class there and destroyed the infrastructure there. You know, look back at countries' involvement in these areas, and we have said nothing. We say nothing. We put no pressure on the countries and where we have access to them. And again, if we cannot take on governments, then we have to support, really support, genuinely support and empower civil society and NGOs who do. You know, Dadaab is tragic that it has existed for as long as it has, 25 years, that generations, there was a story about it recently on the radio, where you have 3 generations of a family living in a refugee camp. And the other part of this story, which I thought was fascinating, and you'll have to correct me where it goes wrong, is that 60% of the population of Dadaab is made up of young people. And what this gentleman was saying, a Somali, was that if these young Somalis have to return to Somalia, 50% of them will be brought into the government military, and the other 50% will join Al-Shabaab, which then just leads to more extremism. And so we have to connect these dots as well. Treatment of refugees in the West, how that then links to, okay.
Well, I didn't mean for you to end quite like that. I mean, you were doing gorgeously and brilliantly.
Dr. Gilmore, I feel victimized.
You're not the first one. Yeah. No, I'm so terribly sorry. I'm just aware of time, and I know that time is not our friend. And I didn't mean to. I was trying to be subtle and failed. So. Women on the front line. Yeah, it's not deep in my own culture, subtlety. Sorry, Sue. She's an exception. Subtlety and elegant. Thank you so very much. Women on the front line and their innate strength and power to act with compassion and to seek peace and resolution rather than be incited to hatred. This is one of the greatest natural resources we have, and yet it's almost as if it's hidden in plain sight. And that is the price we pay for discrimination, for bigotry, and for the narrow idea we have as to those who can lead, who can act, and who can inform. It is time we all made a commitment to subverting that. Women as first responders, women as leaders, but critically, us sharing our own lived experience and being ready to stand up and be identified as a line to a future where that experience is not replicated. That's what it means to have women as first responders. Please, a round of appreciation for the sharks.
The shark.
And a round of appreciation for the fish. Thank you, everybody. And once again, you can pick up your award for being the most discerning audience in the whole of Women Deliver as you leave. Thank you.